Good evening, ladies and gents. We are broadcasting live from Liverpool Podcast Studios. I'm joined this evening by my friend, Dr. Jamie Huysman. Thank you for joining me, sir.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And to be in Liverpool is always on my bucket list, okay? So now I can say,
You've done it.
I've done it.
You've been to Scousland.
I've done it with a friend as well, too.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about the myth of toxic masculinity. And we're also going to be talking about various different stories that people will be aware of in the public sphere and relate that back to narcissism. And we're going to keep it around the issue of masculinity as well, right? Before we start, could you give people who don't know you a bit of background, where you come from and that kind of thing?
I'll definitely do that. Let me keep it as short as possible because we could be here like the last time we were in Prague. I gave you a therapy session. But let me just say, I'm Dr. Jamie Huysman. I'm a psychologist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm a trauma therapist. I deeply believe in our craft. I was a tough kid, oppositional kid, dragged into therapy and really found an alternative there. Many years ago, I ran addiction treatment centers because somehow we all get into this world of healing after we hopefully have been empowered by healing. And I ended up on television in 1992. My gig was I was diagnosed with depression and ADHD at a young age. Taking the shame and stigma out of mental health became just a calling for me. So when I entered in television in 92, I created a program called TV Aftercare.
Mm-hmm.
I would work with guests from talk shows, court shows, reality shows. I started with Geraldo for 5 years, went on with Montel, Sybil Shepherd. I even came over here to your neck of the woods in the UK and used to talk at Edinburgh at the chat shows. We got about 800 guests, $8 million of care, and we got solutions out instead of showing people problems.
Mm-hmm.
My last show was with Lisa Gibbons, who also was a LA personality. She was taking care of her mother with Alzheimer's. At the end of our show, our ratings were lower. And I said, Lisa, the mental health of caregivers is in question. They're all dying before their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we create a charity for caregivers of chronic illness? So we did. We wrote a book in 2006 called Take Your Oxygen First, and we helped caregivers. There was 90 million caregivers in America, 45 million taking care of seniors and 45 million taking care of special needs children. Mm-hmm. Somehow I got burned out when I wrote a book on burnout, and I looked at my board and I said, I need to leave. I need to get better. And I went on to work in a medical field. And right now I work with a primary care company called WellMed, and I'm their chief compassion officer, dealing with emotional support of our employees. Well, a 501c3 for me, being a charity-minded person, is to give back to the world. And years ago, I entered this world thinking I was healthy and well and in recovery for codependency. And my gosh, all of a sudden I met somebody and my whole life shifted. It changed. It just blew up. And so when I came out,
you were in a narcissistically abusive relationship yourself, right?
many years ago, and many years ago, and I say many years ago because it was that, it changed the way I looked at mental health. I thought I knew it. I taught it in college. I learned for 30 years, clinical world.
We think we know.
We think we know. And then all of a sudden, I had
You don't know anything.
We didn't know a damn thing. And here I was walking around thinking I did.
Right.
So I was humbled, and my knees hit the ground. And all of a sudden, I said to myself, what was going on here? And I had a fascination as I came out of this that the cluster B, or we call the personality disorder, the relationship disorders, may be the worst public health disaster in the entire world. So if I was a therapist and I myself was brought to my knees, my gosh, I couldn't imagine what was happening in the rest of the world. So we created a charity called, at that time, the TAR Network, Toxic Abusive Relationship Network. I called it TAR because I didn't want it to be clinical psychobabble. In television, they used to say, cut the psychobabble, Jamie. You're talking to 6 million people. So we had to make it relatable and instead of an ivory tower thing. And we called it TAR, that sticky sub stuff when you just get your foot involved and it's with a person with no empathy and no accountability and transactional. And the feeling of TAR sufficed for any sort of psychopathology of narcissism, borderline, histrionic, or antisocial. And the TAR network started growing, and I met a fabulous person in Prague, and we developed a team over the last 3 years and joined with the Complex PTSD Foundation to provide support for survivors. We call them stars like me or you, survivors of toxic abusive relationship. And in doing that, we're rolling out around the world right now TAR Anon, which is Toxic Abusive Relationship Anonymous, a safe place to be
Very
able to
cool.
talk about this.
Very cool. For people to understand, just going back in your timeline, you were working on these chat shows specifically in the aftercare of people who've been brought on. We have in the UK, we have shows like Jeremy Kyle, but over there, I guess it's like Ricky Lake, like you said, Geraldo. And what they would do is they'd have people expose vulnerable parts of their lives. They'd shoot it, get the benefits of it, send them home with no care for the consequences. And eventually someone was killed because of that, right? There was a famous case in America.
Famous case. And the only reason I was hired with Geraldo in 1992 was actually 10 days after the show aired, a father got a gun to kill his daughter after he was found out at the Holiday Inn he worked at.
He was exposed on the show,
Totally
right?
exposed, and he got fired, and he took a gun and says, if I can't have you, nobody will. And the power of television, the power of celebrity, and we're going to get into that today, was so intense that he gave her one call to call anywhere. I'd call the cops. I'd call my mother. I'd call anybody. She called back to the producers at Geraldo, and they called me up, and I did an intervention, and I put one in one treatment center and the girl in the other, and that started TV Aftercare, which was, went on to help 800 guests. In 1996, 4 years later, the Jenny Jones case occurred where the man came off and killed the other man because he was surprised. And it was he was homophobic and raised homophobic, as I read the depositions, because I was the only licensed therapist that could testify. And it was a $25 million verdict I was part of. And Time Warner, I thought, would never hire me again.
Somebody had said to somebody else on the show, I'm gay, I like you, I know that you like something like that, right? That was
That's television. If you go to the rating sweeps, the associate producer or producers, they lather you up. They say you're doing great. They fly you to New York.
Sure.
They give you a $50 per diem. And then all of a sudden on the third segment, here comes your perpetrator that sexually abused you as a child. And boom, the audience is watching. And that's what happened. So on Jenny Jones' case, the producers kind of insinuated it'd be his ex-girlfriend.
Okay.
And it turned out to be the gentleman upstairs. And when I read the depositions on both sides, because both sides, I was the only licensed therapist on television that could testify a state of mind. And when I read it, I read that the father had raised the boy very homophobically.
Yeah.
He was bipolar off his medication, had just relapsed. And basically Time Warner lit the fuse. So I looked at my wife and I said, I hate to say this to you, but I'm never going to work in TV again because I have to go against Time Warner. And sure enough, on Court TV, I did. And the rest is history. It was a $25 million verdict.
The upshot of that story, though, is the guy took a gun and went in. Tragically, someone lost their life over this, right?
This is all about trauma. And you and I actually know trauma all too well. And what PTSD reaction was that he shot the show. His two friends who brought him over there came with him. They went back to Oakland in Michigan. And the man who actually surprised them on the show put a note on his door, on his car door, and says, please, why don't we continue what we did on the show? And the first thing, the other man, Jonathan Schmitz, was the perpetrator. Scott Amador was the deceased. He went to the department store and bought a shotgun, came and blew the guy's brains out.
Wow.
So he's still, Jonathan, in jail. And Scott, unfortunately, and his family ended up from a talk show hell, terribly broken.
Yeah. So one of the first issues that we're going to tackle, let's do this carefully, Jamie, it's toxic masculinity. What are we saying? Toxic masculinity doesn't exist. What kind of a monster would suggest such a thing?
I agree with you. These are such pejorative words. I do government affairs at our organization, and we have the Me Too movement, right? And I'm sure we're going to get into the story of Anthony Bourdain and Asia because we're talking about Hollywood and how that elevates us as an example. But I started a company called Partners in Men's Health, and somebody looked at me and says, you're starting a He Too movement now. And I go, what? He Too movement? So if it's not Me Too, if it's not He Too, I said, 80% of my patients are women. What is it? And everybody wants to take this masculinity issue or the feminist issue and instead of clinically looking at it properly, as if we need to balance these, they want to run to their football teams.
So if we were in a clinical situation, you and my therapist, and I said, look, I've been abused since childhood predominantly by a woman, and then I got into relationships with women, and they absolutely were psychopathic and narcissistic and all the rest of it. And I said in a clinical setting with you, I want to call this toxic femininity. I'm guessing you would push back on that as a generalization.
I think we all have to push back on that generalization. I think toxic masculinity or the femininity piece is a broad brush.
Yeah.
We definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to go into the red or the blue or the file cabinets around this. The issue that we're talking about, if we're talking about toxicity, it's not toxic masculinity or toxic femininity. It's behavior that we need to call out, which can be toxic. So in your description, all right, you had a woman, let's say, that was overbearing, that was peripatetic, emotional, up and down roller coaster, raged, did whatever. And later in life, you found that to be comfortable. You found people in your life that really resembled that unresolved issue way back when that I hadn't looked at.
This is actually very triggering for me.
And for me too.
I feel like, look, just stop the cameras. I need this therapy now. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, listen, all I can tell you is this is the unbelievable sort of power of today's model of psychology. This is called complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And CPTSD is not yet in the DSM-5, which is our diagnostic statistical manual. PTSD got into it in the 80s. But what you're describing, this sort of picker being broken, I don't want to diagnose because A, you're not my patient, and B, I hate diagnosing. I don't like putting things in file cabinets like toxic masculinity or somebody who's going through things. But I can tell you flat out that if we hold judgment for the moment and look at behavior, we tend to recreate our dramas and traumas until we intervene on them. So at our charity, which now is called the STAR Network, Survivors of Toxic Abusive Relationship, we say that if you don't break the family trauma, Richard, the family trauma will break you. So in your scenario, if I'm to go back to his picker and he's continually picking the same woman over and over, well, that's a trigger. That's really not the issue, okay? Why is he picking the same one? Well, it felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Heck, the first 8 years of your life when the child has the blank slate, when your brainstem, your amygdala, your prefrontal cortex between 4 and 8, this is all trauma, is being formed. You're seeing what feels comfortable, what fits you like a glove. And sure enough, it's only natural that you're going to find somebody that fits you like a glove from your childhood.
So then what I have is a reality tunnel that I'm living in where I'm going, no, all women are like this. But it's actually, that's the reality tunnel that I'm sort of co-creating based on my unconscious script from my childhood.
You are. And then also toxic masculinity falls in that same category because all men are not like toxic, right?
So then I've been thinking about this because I knew this was coming up. And I think I said to you in the WhatsApp messages, the way I usually sort of, because all that this does is just create more division. As I say, okay, drop it. Drop the idea of toxic masculinity. Drop the idea of toxic femininity. But there's something there. And I would say, okay, so you have like a yang principle and a yin principle from Taoist philosophy, from Chinese medicine. Yang is very assertive and pushing. Yin is passive and pulling. Can somebody become rigidly and toxically yang? So they're always bullying. They're always tyrannical. They're always looking to score points. And I would say, yes. Can men be like that? I just had an interaction with somebody yesterday who was exploitative and physically bullying and so on. So I absolutely know nasty men like this. Can somebody who's born a woman be toxically yang? And I was like, no, but yeah, they can too. Can men be toxically yin? Very, very. So the noble yin, there's noble yin, there's noble yang, then there's the toxic or sick version of it. Yes. Yes, you can become toxically passive. You can become inert. You can become victimized. You can become passive aggressive. And so then I was thinking maybe that's point number one. We take away masculinity and femininity because it's just too stigmatizing. If I say toxically feminine and a woman hears that and goes, oh, he means all women, I would say you're okay to think that. But similarly, when you say toxically masculine and a guy hears it and goes, well, you're talking about all men, he would be right to think that. It's stigmatizing language. We could get away from it. We could talk about structures and archetypes. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to say some women become toxically yang and some men become toxically yin. It's not so simple. I know we like simple distinctions, but it ain't that simple, right?
We're a snowflake. Let's face it. There's not going to be one more Richard Grannon ever created in 100% this entire correct.
World, right? Narcissistic elation achieved. You heard it here. The man's a psychotherapist. I'm unique.
You're unique, and I'm unique, and there's never going to be any one of us that's going to be recreated. You could not recreate the culture. You could not recreate what happened
Mm.
in your life with your father, your mother, your sister. You couldn't recreate this in a million years. All of us are so individual, and we're also blank slates. I mean, let's give Jung and Freud and Adler and Maslow credit. Let's face it. I think our personality is pretty much there by 8 to 9 years old. That the fight, the flight, the freeze response, which are all biological, is there. And if you're in a poop show watching your parents fight, or you're in a very sort of unstable relationship at home, your parents are not fair, consistent, and available, which is, I think, the key to parenting, then you're going to be manifesting, insanity. And the beauty of complex PTSD, and I say the beauty because I think this is an empowering model. Why we created the STAR network and why we're using Taranon and why people, I think, are stars that come in, is you don't have to wait to look at your therapist on Thursday at 2:00 to find out what happened with you and your mother at 10 years old.
Right.
You now can understand that you have to reparent yourself, that you are unique, that you may have gone through what you mentioned with a woman or a man that was overbearing and absolutely, that was the behavior you emulated. And we reparent ourselves. And what's reparenting? Reparenting is ourselves for things we never received as a child. Now, I'm not indicting parents. I'm not saying everywhere was nefarious. And I'm a father as well. Believe me, I'm not going to get it right either, right? It's tough to be fair, consistent, and available. But I do think when you go into the toxic masculinity world or the toxic femininity world, I think you're giving up accountability for your world.
100%.
Okay, you're not taking accountability.
That's the easy way out. That's a coward's way out. You just go, oh, women are evil. Men are evil. End of story.
What about me?
Cowardice.
Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in others. So what about me when I look into that mirror? Now, 1 out of 8 people, you and I know that well, has a personality disorder. And that's probably underreported because men don't report it often. In America alone, we say 1 out of 8, if they have a relationship disorder, touch 200 million people. Is that insane? Yeah. So at the STAR Network, we have men, women, we see LGBTQ+, we have teens and tweens, we have caregivers of high conflict because we think that the attachment disorder, and I certainly know from firsthand, is the worst public health disaster in the world. So we don't really know how to parent well enough. And that 1 out of 8, it had a primary caregiver that didn't give a damn. It had 2 primary caregivers they didn't give a damn. I think it takes one half healthy neurotic parent to bond with a child to avoid the cluster B. I really do. Now, they may end up codependent, and I think that's transactional too, and I think that you need to get in recovery, but at least when they get in recovery, they can find empathy, they can find accountability, and they can find that life doesn't have to be transactional. Whereas the attachment disorder, we don't have treatment centers to teach empathy. We don't have that. Yeah. So that 1 out of 8 is one thing, but the 7 out of 8 need to take responsibility that if I didn't get the right parenting and I'm passing this on to my kid, well, hell, I'm recreating the trauma. So instead of saying this is your side or my side, look in the mirror and say, what do I have to do here?
It's moving the locus of control back to the individual. And sometimes when I talk in these terms, I get a tremendous amount of pushback from that. And I kind of think, okay, what is this? What do people think I'm taking away from them? And I think it's just easier to say, you did this to me. I am a pure victim. And that means there's nothing I can ever do, ever again to help myself. And you just think, come on now. In what reality would that be true? We have to start helping ourselves. Nobody's saying it didn't happen. Nobody's saying there's some nasty women out there. There's some awful women out there. There's awful men out there. Evil exists. We acknowledge that. Bad things happen. They can happen to you when you're weak. Usually they happen when you're weak, when you're vulnerable, when you're isolated. Nobody's saying it didn't happen. What are we going to do with that? And what stories are we going to tell ourselves moving forward into the future? Because I worry in psychology, I'm sure you're aware of it, the American Psychological Association, not the Psychiatric Association, the other APA, put out this piece a few years ago about men and boys and this idea of toxic masculinity, this story that the things that make men are intrinsically evil. And I was like, this is like children's nursery rhymes. Girls are made of sugar and spice and all things nice, and boys are made of slugs and snails and puppy dog styles. Do you have that nursery rhyme in America?
Yes, we do. We have it. And actually, that unfortunately is being operationalized in families every day.
Right.
It really is. Still to this day, So
in families and in the education system as well, right?
absolutely, I can't say to anybody there's toxic masculinity out there. But what I can say, and this is, I think, what we're getting confused by not taking accountability, because I work with men all the time. My first work was with the military, sheriffs. I'm a trauma therapist. So my men who go to therapy, who look inside themselves of self-awareness, will say, here's the quality of a man. I need to protect my family. Okay. I want to have integrity. I have boundaries. I have values. I want to be there. I want to be loyal, my friends. This is absolutely fantastic stuff. There's nothing toxic about that. That's being a man. What I find is toxic is usually what their father told them, or the toxic positivity when they were growing up, or what their
Right.
supervisor or what their captain in the military tells them. And the toxic positivity denies our emotions as a child. So it just glosses over. Well, pull yourself from the bootstraps. Life's tough. Pain is there. You don't hear the pain of a man. And so the man just glosses over that vulnerable side of him. And he's supposed to, like you said, pick him up, be that man. Or the woman's supposed to be that woman. And that is not how we need to be.
That's interesting. Toxic positivity, sort of glossing over real issues. Because I've had this for years. So I had my own brush with the military, and then I worked with military guys in teaching combatives, and then also in therapeutic situations. And I was like, there definitely is value in a situation in just gritting it out. You've got an injury, keep going. Just get through it. There is value in that. But then I look and I go, you look at MMA fighters, the slightest injury they pick up in training, there's a tremendous amount of effort to heal the injury. Injury here is metaphorical. It could be trauma, it could be emotional. But say I strained my Achilles. In fact, in the military, in certain situations, if you picked up an injury and you don't report it, and you put the rest of your unit at risk through the failure to report, the military can put you in prison. You can actually get jailed for that. So I was going, So obviously it is the case that sometimes it's right to be stoic and tough and muscle through. Whether you're a man or a woman, you're a human being on this planet, shit gets tough sometimes. But at the same time, so maybe toxic positivity can be a plaster temporarily, but ultimately, even in the military, even in combat sports, the toughest of the tough, they still have to get help when things hurt. If there's a broken link in the chain.
I work in my day job at an organization. So I work with leadership and high-performing teams. And our leaders, unfortunately, who've been taught by that same father you're talking about, thinks they have to be tough. They have to take it in. They can't show their vulnerability. I believe vulnerability is a superpower of leadership. I have seen people being vulnerable and actually talking to their entire team, making them psychologically safe, creating more innovative ideas by understanding that, look, pain is inevitable, as the Buddha saying said, but suffering is not.
Yeah.
And that if I'm going to go through this and going to be vulnerable, the beauty of our trauma model or complex PTSD, and again, I'm talking about Taranon, is that we can develop the resilience finally. We don't have to wait to come see me at 2:00. We can change that brain. If I mentioned to you the brain stem, we don't even know what 0 to 4 trauma is like. We don't even know what in utero trauma is like. Okay. And we have a blank slate as a brain. I'm very fortunate to be on the advisory board of the Complex PTSD Foundation and the Polyvagal Institute. I'm a Jungian trained therapist, and God love it. I had a Jungian trained therapist at the time when I was going through difficult times. They're not trained in trauma. They couldn't really help. The psychopathology, the brain is now the key, the beauty of our trauma model. Or let's take that person that you're talking about in the military, to be vulnerable and to say, look, I got some hell going on here. I'm in pain, whether it's metaphorical or not, but I can actually heal it. When I listen to you and your YouTube, one of the reasons I'm here and enjoying myself so much with you, both in Liverpool, but also in my life when I listen to you, was you didn't soft pedal recovery. You are a martial artist, and you trained at that time with Spartan Life Coach so many people out there. And you said to them, look, you have to do it. You can't read your way into this any longer. This is not something you become smarter. The longest trip you take is from your head to your heart. So if we're being raised by somebody saying, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, or you can't cry or whatnot, well, then later on, we have to cry. We have to teach ourselves. We have to reparent ourselves. And we hope we're in a relationship that allows us to do that. So this is what I say, and unfortunately, people will push back on this. I think the first toxic relationship we have is as a child with our parents.
Yeah.
I think the first trauma bond we get is with our parents. I think
Yeah.
the first time we experience gaslighting is with our parents. And I don't think it's nefarious. I think they're doing what their parents did and their parents did behind them. The second thing, at 18 years old, we really had never experienced that healthy relationship that we watched. So the next relationship that's toxic is one with ourselves.
Yeah.
So we have to be reparenting ourselves that we didn't get because our low self-esteem, we didn't see a healthy relationship. I believe that the toxic person that drives somebody into Taranon, our program, or drives you into your tube being fabulous sort of instructor there, or me running a charity, I think the person we meet is only a trigger for that unresolved issues we never dealt with back then. And so I call it a mirage. That's why we call our treatment center for complex PTSD and we call our parenting program the Oasis. Because all childhood trauma, I think, tells us what love is, and it really isn't. So I always say that the relationship or the roles you have in childhood definitely do not work in adulthood.
Yeah.
Do not.
Yeah. Yeah. There's very little that you can carry. The roles don't work. The coping strategies don't work. The myths, the fantasies don't work. And yet we carry them unless they're investigated in therapy or I don't know if people are engaged in spiritual practice. They don't apply anymore, and they tend to be maladaptive, right? You could argue this, say we talk about narcissism. That's a strategy for coping with a nasty reality in childhood. It's a retreat into fantasy. It's not the worst thing in the world if you're 4, 5, 6 years old. You can't leave. At 45 years old, that's ugly.
It is. And rather than talk about my, recovery or yours, I thought that was why we should talk about Hollywood a little bit today, because none of them are my patients, okay? And I want to really qualify this. I am not diagnosing anybody when I describe what I call observable behavior. Anybody out there could be in the audience watching, your Liverpool amazing team out there and could be describing what they're seeing with the strikers and this and who they're beating. That's literally what I'm going to actually do here with you today, if possible. I thought that we could use some Hollywood relationships, since I know America is a very celebrity-driven country.
Oh no, people are fascinated here as well. And these people function like, I don't know, the Greek gods and goddesses would have done back in the day. Even if it's not, I know what you're saying. We don't know these people. We don't know these humans, but there's an archetypal reality that they possess as well. I get it.
And also they give us permission, unfortunately, by being public figures to be able to converse. For instance, everybody probably who's listening to this tonight or today knows the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. It was, to me, the O.J. Simpson trial of relationships.
Right.
Nobody has ever opened up a relationship in that manner. Nobody had the money to pay the legal fees to open up a relationship like that than Johnny Depp, probably an A-lister who he said, and I think he actually came out and actually did that, proved to Lily Rose and Jack, his kids, I wasn't the aggressor. I wasn't the perpetrator. I might have been the person who needed recovery.
Yeah.
I might have been the person who literally was slipping and sliding. I might have expressed my vulnerability, but I wasn't the abuser. And that's why I think he put that trial on, where again, the trial created those, we're on Johnny's side and we're on Amber's side again.
Another split.
Instead of looking in the mirror and saying, what about me?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of splitting. I know Gad Sard calls this epistemological dichotomania, which is a fancy way of saying splitting. It's a way of viewing reality in which people get broken up into teams, not 5 teams, not 16 teams, 2, just 2. You're either Team Johnny, and people would say that online. They'd say on Instagram, Team Johnny, Team Amber, in a situation that obviously we're only getting like a little view into that world. And then more and more came out during the court case, and obviously people's perceptions of it altered over time. One of the things that I saw that I thought was interesting was a worked example of, as I say, don't know them, wasn't there, using them archetypally here, of what seemed to be reactive abuse, where you would look at a slice of what somebody does and you hear the voice note and you see like a little bit of the video and you go, wow, that looks really, really nasty. And then the editing gets changed. So you see the 3 minutes before that and you go, oh, they're responding to, in 20 seconds of rage, 3 hours of gaslighting and abuse, where they're literally saying to the person, please leave me be. I need a timeout. We're not getting anywhere in this argument. Let me walk and cool off. Nope. I'm going to keep going like a heat-seeking missile until you pop. Then when you pop, I'm going to go, oh, look at you. What did you do?
That's so true. And when Amber and Johnny, again, we had to discern what was the reactive abuse here and what was the actual, instigator of the abuse. They come into my office, not them, but obviously that dyad, when you have somebody who's more vulnerable, let's say he needs recovery. You can find the vulnerability in terms of drinking, you're self-medicating, anything that really, I think, breaks into our authenticity can be called toxic, because that, to me, is the goal of recovery from complex trauma, is actual authenticity. So I believe, personally, when those two come into my office, I can't tell one from the other. I went, interesting, the movie that didn't make it, right, recently, which was The Joker, was called The Folie à Deux. And the folie à deux is an actual crazy, madness of two. And both of them will be sitting in my office. And I can't discern which is the cluster B and which is the kind of the codependent who's sitting there. Because until 4 or 5 sessions, I really don't know who is empathy, who is accountability. Yeah. So with Johnny and as you mentioned, and Amber, the reactive abuse is there. And I bet you it triggered you. As a clinician, it triggered me, but as a human being, it really hit me hard because it was out there for everybody to see. And when I started talking to some of my clients, which were police officers, they were coming up and talking to me, not about going on the streets and having a gun pointed at their head or dealing in a crack house. They were talking to me about going home to a relationship with their wife.
Same.
And all of a sudden saying, I am him.
Yeah.
And that I got more calls to our office during the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial than any other time, I think, ever in my clinical career.
I had clients like that as well. And I lived it. I was doing nightclub security here in Liverpool. And we would have all kinds of fights and drama and people punching me and throwing bottles at me. And I really didn't care. And that wasn't me being a tough guy and going, I don't care. It was my job. I accepted it. It was part of the contract. It was part of the job. But what was happening at home with my girlfriend who I was living with at the time, in my male mind, I was just like, that ain't fair. This isn't the rules. That's not over in the street. We had rules. Like, I signed up for that. I didn't sign up for this at home. I thought we would have peace and love and support. And all I would get was, I don't want peace. I want problems. I'd go home to problems all the time. And it drove me so crazy. I started to think, it must be me. It can't be her. I love her. She's wonderful. But she's always angry with me. I was 25. It must be me. I started to blame myself, much in the way a child will in an abusive environment they can't get out of.
This is a good time for me to say that if you're being triggered, because actually all this, we're just human beings here. It doesn't matter how many titles we have after our name or what desk we're sitting at instead of human doings. If you're being triggered, I am sending everybody, go to tarnon.org, TARnon.org. It's, you'll see on the top of it, if you want immediate help, I hope there's no suicidal ideations out there, but if you want immediate help, please go. Or we have support groups to go to. But what you're saying is so true. We live our life professionally, then we go home. I also felt that with Anthony Bourdain. If we move on to another Hollywood figure, that the world, I think, still sits in mystery. How a man who had, I think, the greatest job in the history of the world by going city to city, a phenomenal chef. He was a quote unquote, I felt like I envisioned you years ago, a man's man. He had all those characteristics, but we really didn't see or feel the vulnerability behind him until he got into a relationship later on with a woman named Asia Argenta from Italy.
I would love to know what do you think happened? why did that happen? Why did it end up in such a tragic outcome? What was that in your professional opinion?
This is professional. I'm almost not want to go there because that would make him my patient. But as a person who watches observable behavior,
Okay.
and absolutely like you, drills down because I'm fascinated. My daughter says I'm a geek, and she's right. I mean, I'm a behaviorist. I'm a psychologist. I chose as a field years ago. So I watched it closely because I really had a great connection to him. I think many of us had a great connection to him, for some odd reason. But I said, what could change here? Well, he left the marriage where he seemed to be grounded. He had a beautiful daughter who he was very close to. When he left that marriage, he then met Asia. And Asia was a daughter of an Italian director. Again, there's no diagnoses here, but at the end of the day, Asia impacted him hugely. So if you want to watch his documentary, you'll see that even he brought her into producing shows later, a little bit like you and I are talking about, just observable, where Yoko Ono started coming into the Beatles, okay,
Yes, yeah.
for no good reason at some point at the end, and the Beatles broke up. He started bringing her in. Well, she went to him and said, look, I'm in the Me Too movement. Harvey Weinstein, also raped me. And he started talking himself, if you recall, about toxic masculinity. Believe us or not, Anthony went off on this rant because he was convinced that he was privileged and she was so courageous because she was in the Me Too movement. And she actually convinced him to go on Oprah and kind of sanitize her reputation. She got what she kind of needed. At the end of the day, she was in the Me Too movement, but she also had a 17-year-old that she had crossed the line with prior. And Anthony Bourdain,
I didn't know
it's
that.
very much documented, paid the $400,000, I think it was, settlement. So
But she was an adult when she was with the.
she was the adult. And so everyone has obviously things in their background. So I think Anthony sanitized the reputation on Oprah. I think he actually did what he needed to do in terms of settling the suit with the 17-year-old. And then he went on the road. And next thing you know, he saw her with somebody else on television.
After he's gone to bat for her, after he's put his reputation on the line for her.
After that. And in France, he saw it. And I'm sure we're not privy to the phone calls, but if you know the relationship as I know the relationship, it was one hell of a roller coaster. And next thing you know, he was hanging in the hotel. And none of us asked why. Why was this person who was so much America and the world's sort of chef and who we actually idolize so much would hang himself after having the greatest job in the world and being handsome and having everything going? Now, I will say, like Johnny, he probably needed recovery from alcohol. He never really ran away from it. He talked about being, if you will, using drugs and alcohol and had never gotten AA or NA right. I think values, and you and I have talked about this, are the garlic and the crucifix to the energy vampire.
Yeah. Strong values, strong moral philosophy, good boundaries. Yeah.
That's it. I think if you start losing them, and I think at that time when, I was in that relationship and I could think you were probably, and Anthony was, we started losing them and compromising them and seeing that mirage or that, that soulmate, that love bombing. And then all of a sudden we lose it. We then, get sucked in. So he needed recovery. That could have given them values. Johnny probably is the same way. So Anthony was a mystery to me. And then I drilled down and I say, no, he's like many of the men and of course women that I have the unfortunate opportunity of meeting who are in these terrible relationships between cluster Bs and codependence.
I would say something on that. I'm not talking about the actual real world Anthony Bourdain. Let's imagine he's a mythical character or a character from a novel that you're writing. Let's pretend that for a second. This character that you've written, this doesn't make sense to me. Why has he put this woman on a pedestal so high, so quickly, and allowed her to instrumentalize him so blatantly? Why did he do that? Why have you written this character this way?
Well, many, many years ago, and I'd be happy to tell everybody I'm a vulnerable, recovering person in complex post-traumatic stress too. It felt comfortable to me. I had actually had to calm down somebody, maybe who was yelling, who was screaming. I had to go save. We called it codependency back in my day, but it turns out to be like Pete Walker's book, which How to Thrive, Not Just Survive. It turned out to be the fawn response.
Yeah.
So I think all this fit Anthony like a glove. I said, if you don't get in recovery, you don't have the values, you're actually prey to the mirages of complex trauma. And when I discharge patients or see patients being discharged from AA or NA programs, I see the relapse happening, Richard, because they're not embracing what felt comfortable as a child, which was the mirage.
So would there be conjecture then that he was compelled to save his mother? She was an over-demanding, overbearing mother who parentified him, engaged in emotional incest. He finds it didn't happen in his marriage because that woman was probably stable-ish, stable enough and sane, but he finds it in a woman who's not stable, who's not well, who has the same problems that mummy has. He then regresses back to infancy and goes, I get a chance here. I can save mummy this time.
Absolutely.
Because I'm not judging. I've done this. I've done this more than one time.
Many of us in healthcare are like that too. We're the saviors.
Right, saviors. So, and then you look back on the relationship and I'm like, what? Why did so much happen within the first 6 weeks? Like, why did you give this woman so much power? And why did you centralize your whole life around, like, without saying the word narcissism, without saying the word codependency? I go through this with my therapist. Why? That's odd. You know, you really. So sometimes the narrative of narcissistic abuse is they flew down from the bell tower as a vampire, came in the window as a bat, changed into a beautiful vampire woman, and I went, oh no, she's got me. That she's biting me on the neck, and I'm like, oh, there's nothing I could do. That's not what happened. No. I met her, and it's like you see these like close up, super focused videos of 2 globs of water. They're not together, and then boom, they're one. It was like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're so enmeshed, and that's when they come in my office that I don't know one from the next. And again, it's the folie à deux. But I also work with men now a lot through what I almost hate to use this word because like toxic masculinity, it's taken on a life of its own, but parental alienation.
Right.
Okay. Or let's call it estrangement. For some odd reason, it's been co-opted again. But when I work with...
we just can't say words anymore.
We just can't look in the mirror and say, we just screwed up. What are we going to do about this issue? I have to own it. No, I have to call it something else. But I'm looking at men, again, who want to protect their family. And obviously, when they come in to those relationships that you're describing and have a child with one. I've often heard you say this on YouTube. You're very, very inspirational to so many people that, look, I didn't have a kid with one, no contact. I'm out of here. Yeah. Thank God I can have that. Well, there's a lot of men and women both out there who cannot. They have to have what's called modified contact. I don't believe you can co-parent. I don't think you can counter-parent. I think you have to neuro-parent. You know, at the STAR Network, again, we have support, treatment, and actually prevention as our mission. And so we're setting up neurological parenting programs in hospitals now because I don't think anybody knows how not to create Frankenstein,
right?
The attachment disordered child.
Yeah.
We teach them how to do Lamaze, we teach them yoga, but we don't teach them how to raise a child that's attachment disordered. So when I see a man now wants not just can he not do no contact, but has to run into that burning home to try to rescue his child.
Yeah.
And then, let's face it, the toxic person are going to weaponize the child. If they can't get to you after you put your boundaries, they're going to get to either your neighbors, your family, we call those flying monkeys, or they're going to get to your child and weaponize the child. And we call that alienation or estrangement. What do you do then? Well, we say you have to become a star. You cannot change, unfortunately, that person in front of you. Look, doesn't matter how many years of clinical training I have. I can't change you. I couldn't change that person. The only thing we can do is reparent ourselves and radiate safety and realize that the end game here, the revenge, if you will, is healing our own lives. And our child, and we call them stars, survivors, our child will see and feel that, and that's a corrective experience. It's no consolation during the psychological war, but you got to play the long game on this one.
Right.
So
the route out. So, well, you've lived it. People ask me about this all the time. When they have to have contact with a narcissistic ex because of the children, what would be your advice? How would you advise them? Because you've lived that.
We've developed a program. Actually, the beautiful thing, and I'll keep mentioning Taranon because it's free, and you could go to taranon.org and you can come to our meetings all the time. We have 12 steps, but they're not the steps of AA and NA. You know, my life's unmanageable. I'm turning it over to a power greater than myself. No, it's not that. You know, trauma recovery is taking our lives back. If you look at the song Numb, you know, listen to Chester and Linkin Park singing it. I want to be more like me and less like you. If you listen to Mumford and Sons, The Cave, I want to be known by my name again. So Taranon is taking your life back and doing it in what we call polyvagal intervention. The first step is radical acceptance, right? With no judgment. And we show people how to do that. We use Tara Brach's work with RAIN, recognize, investigate, you know, accept, investigate, nurture yourself. We teach people that at Taranon. But to be frank with you, we all have felt this, but we have to go reparent ourselves and start working our own program. So we have the 12 steps of Taranon. We have the promises of that. And we do parental alienation groups, and we do for family groups on Wednesday, and we do no contact. But to answer your question, we teach people modified contact. We teach people no contact. Now, modified contact is what? The gray rock technique. We teach people how to be the most uninteresting pebble in that damn driveway. Yep. You know, how to speak monosyllabically, how not to jump into the reaction. We call the tar pit, the toxic abusive relationship pit, because your toxic partner will want to pull you there. They thrive there. We always say you can't jump in the mud, play with the pig. You're going to get dirty and the pig likes it. So at the end of the day, they're going to try to drag you. So at Taranon, we teach you through the steps and to the promises how not to jump in there. And yes, we'll teach you how to do gray rock. We'll give you a sponsor. By the way, we call them TAR mentors instead of tour mentors. And they're going to help you learn modified contact. Realizing, okay, you can't change the other person, but you can be the corrective experience for your child. You can create a neuro-safe environment where your child one day will prefer to be neurosafe than to be walking on eggshells.
Right. So ultimately, the investment is made there with the child. So when the child does have agency and they can make those choices, they're making the right kinds of choices.
But we have to have the agency to realize we have to go to the child within us that never really had that as children. We felt comfortable in that dysfunction, in that war zone, and we went out and recreated it. So it's, you know, it begins with us. And that's why Taranon is so critical for us. I think people come in there, they reparent. The key through trauma recovery, which you know so well because you coach so many people, is two things: emotional regulation. So if I'm walking on eggshells and I need to change the chemistry of my body, I'll do breath work. I do Pilates. You're a martial artist. You may jump into the ring. I mean, that's your emotional regulator. I have people at work that crochet and that were on corrective action plan. I would go to the manager. I said, would you let this person crochet while she's receiving all these negative phone calls? She'll go off a corrective action plan because she actually emotionally regulates. The second part is you have to hang around healthy people. Yeah. You cannot hang around people that bully you, that tell you what to do. You have to have people that meet you halfway, bear witness to your pain. I always say, what's burnout? Burnout's when one person works harder than the other. And that's a relationship that we felt comfortable with as a child when we were being gaslit and trauma bonded. So all it's about, Richard, is emotional regulation, taking care of yourself during stress, and co-regulation, hanging around healthy people and getting rid of those negative energy forces to regain your values.
Simple, practical steps.
Yes,
sure.
But you're the sensei, and you tell people for 10 years as I listen, you have to do it.
Oh, yeah.
You have to do it.
Yeah, just listening to a YouTube video or attending a seminar is not going to do it. It's consistent action across time. It's a discipline. It's a strength. It's a skill. You have to work it.
So listen, here's another one before we end today. There's a couple that were burning in my mind when you and I discussed we might do Hollywood stories. I'm seeing the changing of the guard. 35 years ago, of course, in my day, you accepted what your parents said. You could be the biggest damn despot in the world. You had to listen to mom and dad, right? And that's what the Menendez case.
Ah, yes.
The Menendez case, which is really on everybody's mind right now, because I think as we're doing this, we may later on find out something else, but I think they're being considered for release right now.
Did I tell you that I was asked to be an expert witness on that case?
You would be an ideal expert witness. What happened?
So it was 2015. The wife of one of the brothers, I can't remember whichever brother got married in prison. And she said, we're going to release a documentary. We want you in the documentary. We're hoping that'll trigger a retrial. And we want you to say that because of the intensely psychopathic narcissistic abuse of the father, it compelled them to take this action. And I was using Skype more back then. And I Skyped with her back and forth a few times. And I wonder what you think of this. I couldn't. So I went out of psychology mode for a second and back in self-defense mode. And I was a bit like, I can't walk the path of, if you're abused, that's awful. I'm so sorry. But you guys made a plan. You acquired the weaponry. You executed the plan. It wasn't just like some ideation, some revenge fantasy. And then you took actions after the murder that were pretty psychopathic. I understand. I'm compassionate to it, but I don't know that I because of the age at which they did it, I don't know if there's a place for them in normal society. So I just said, I can't. What do you think of that?
That's pretty noble. I mean, obviously, that's your values. I love it. I would respect it. I'd go to war for it. I think you're 100% right. I'm an expert witness in certain cases like you would be, and this would be ideal for you. I'm a little bit more malleable on this one, not because it wasn't one of the worst heinous sort of murders I've ever, and I do forensic work, I've ever had described to me. It was an absolute bloodbath, one of the worst scenes of anger and rage. And yes, it was two sons who went and did that. Somehow, 35 years later, in the age of Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you name it, we've now looked at mitigating issues. So I always have to look at the historian. Taking it from your perspective, listening to the Menendez brothers as historians, I might really be right there where you're at. Now I'm starting to hear about the sister of the wife. I'm starting to hear about the cousin. They're all coming up talking about the resentencing and the clemency. I think everybody in TikTok and YouTube is starting to hear more about the abuse that could have been happening, the despot nature of the father who absolutely, and you see this a lot in Hollywood, controlled everybody like it was his own movie theater. And the mitigating issues, which is what we go to court about, is the mitigating issues, how long your sentence is going to be. I started coming out. I don't think they saw it before. I think they saw the blue blood. They saw that you blew your parents away. You now end up with multi-millions of dollars. Boom, this is a pretty open and shut case. Somehow the age of information and TikTok and people, and now also the younger generation, which I'm seeing, not just in my daughter, but others, are talking more about mental health than we ever talked about it 35 years ago.
Yeah.
They're getting a new trial. And so he was a despot. By the way, his wife supported the despot. We see this dyad all the time. We see the absolute, fascist narcissist. I'm not my patient, but the narcissist, and then we see the empath who signs off on the codependency, on the narcissism, and doesn't protect the children.
Which is crazy. You would think every single instinct in a parent, especially the mother of the children, would be, I will do anything to protect them, and
anything except and I know that the trauma bond may be the worst, most insidious bond there ever is out there. And it may take precedent when you're that sick over your child's safety. And that is, to me, in their mind, was the killing offense. You never protected me. How many times does a client go to their mother or father and say, I was abused, and the person says, I don't believe it. I can't believe that person would ever do that. And I think when you're not protected as a child, then that homicidal rage is not just there for the person who perpetrated the quote unquote sexual abuse or any abuse. It also goes to the person who didn't protect.
Was the father raised in a violent environment?
Not so much a violent environment, but he was Cuban American, and he pretty much was raised during Castro's days, and he pretty much saw that. Again, when you look at leaders around the world, if we want to go back to that masculinity sort of model, I think he saw Fidel Castro. He had designs to come back and actually run for office in South Florida. And when you really look at this case, a lot of things the public has seen has changed. But one thing, Richard, the mother or father that doesn't protect the child and falls prey to the mentally challenged or relationship disordered person I think silence is just as complicit, maybe even more, because that narcissist is a mental health disorder. That person is on the third room of my second floor of my psych unit. The person who's not is the one that didn't protect you.
It's very interesting what you're saying. It's quite powerful because I'm just having a think based on what you've said. I shouldn't really be thinking live on air, but I'm going to do it anyway, self-indulgently. So what you just said before, the trauma bond. So I talk trauma bond. I talk narcissistic abuse, but then you said the trauma bond could be so powerful and drive you so crazy that it would override a mother's drive to protect her children.
That's an addiction. We look at the trauma bond as an addiction. What's the definition of an addiction? To do any behavior whatsoever despite adverse consequences. We see the trauma bond as an addiction. I do. So how many people in some homicidal, crack raged, heroin ingested time has killed somebody, has done something, the most insane things in the world? I mean, I go to do jail forensic work all the time.
We know it's usually that. There's not many people in prison for violent offenses who did it sober.
No.
Like, they didn't pull over at a traffic light after a week of prayer and sobriety and stab someone to death. It's mostly alcohol and drugs, right?
It is, but if you look at it, it's mostly addictions, and the trauma bond is one of the most severe addictions at all. Why? It's Skinnerian, intermittent reinforcement. This is, again, if I'm going back to our foundation, our charity, why we have neuroparenting. Listen. Operant conditioning doesn't work as a parenting technique. And the first trauma bond we ever experience is with our parents. I know it's an innocent thing. I'm sure I'm also guilty of it. So please, no letters and things, but I'm looking for the trauma bond means that sometimes you get the food and sometimes your jailer doesn't bring the food and you're not so sure what's going to happen and when it happens. So you go forward, you go backwards. You get shocked incessantly, you get used to the shock. You get fed incessantly, you get tired of the food. Now you go back and forth, that becomes an addiction. And I think what happens with, let's say in that family, the Menendez family, you are there for 30 some years, 20 some years with your mate, going through that intermittent reinforcement. And I think that trauma bond took total precedence over Jungian's maternal energy. And I think she was caught up in that. And to me, that's even more insidious than the mentally disordered person who has an attachment disorder at age 6. That person was salvageable. The other person in my clinical world is less salvageable.
That's a pretty strong case. It also, I need to rethink. So you have the trauma bond, and then you have all of the narcissist's coordinates. So the narcissist at the head of a family unit insists that everybody lives in their world, their dissociative, psychotic, grandiose, fantasy-based world. And then even the mother is pulled into that in such a wild and contra-genetic evolutionary instinct way. And then the boys are pulled into it as well. That's why I asked, did the father come from a violent background? Because the two boys are carrying his introjects. So even if he wasn't violent with them, if violence is there, they feel it. My nephew I told you about, when I go and hang around with him, and the boys are very good when I'm there, one of the boys, he literally starts doing martial arts moves. And when I'm there, I've never shown him a single martial art move. And this little kid is walking around the room going, ha, ha. And then she'll put a t-shirt on him and he goes, no, mommy, I want the t-shirt that makes me look strong. He wants the t-shirt with the cut off sleeves. And then he's going like this. And she's like, she turned to me and laughed and she goes, this is you. You're doing this. And I'm like, where? He's like absorbing it psychically.
I don't want to get too clinical with your family. You're not my patient. I think I was yours once. But
no, I never knew it.
You never knew it because you do some fabulous work out there that you'll never know how many people you've helped. But I will say this to you. I think he was looking for a healthy father. I think he wanted to connect with you. We all know that you're a martial artist. We know that is your DNA.
Yeah.
He does. He knows that his uncle is that person.
In some weird, even though he's not seen it, he couldn't understand it.
Your sister and you are very close, and I think he wanted to connect with you in a healthy. He needed a corrective emotional experience.
Right.
And I think he was messaging you. When I put adolescents into treatment and I find them let's say I've found some heinous ones. I remember one person that would break into a master bedroom 3 different times and actually masturbate in the master bedroom. And I put him in treatment 3 times.
I'm such a child.
Listen to the clinical trends.
Such a child.
Listen.
You know why I'm laughing? Because it's masturbate in the master bedroom. God help,
Yeah.
God forgive me.
And here's the thing. So let me drill down clinically, because you're right. Here's how family systems work. I was mystified, and everybody in our treatment team was mystified. We saw him come in 3 separate times, doing drugs, doing breaking, entering, and same MO into the bed. Until we did what's called recharge weekends, where we invited the family 4 times a year after they were discharged to come and work with us.
Yeah.
The father at 2 a.m. knocked on my door and said, "Doctor, I need to tell you." I said, "Sir, what do you need to tell me?" He says, "I cross-dress. I go out at 2 a.m. I go across the park in Washington, D.C." He was an executive vice president of a large corporation.
Okay.
That was the family secret.
Okay.
That was the sexual piece. That was the piece that this boy was. This is how the families
So
work.
was he getting changed in the master bedroom or something? Like, is the son picking up that the peak of psychic sexuality is?
I think the children are always watching, Richard. I think the children are metaphorical. I don't think you need children. When I work in the work sites, our children are our employees.
Okay.
I think that we're always unconsciously looking for something, and that if we haven't resolved the childhood issues, and most of us haven't, and I can't wait till CPTSD gets placed in the DSM-5.
Which it will.
Which it has to, because my gosh, to me, this is why all relapse is happening in addictions, and that's why we have Taranon. I believe until we come to grips with the shadow, as Carl Jung would say, invite our shadow to lunch, which is pretty much the childhood trauma, I think we're going to be floundering in the desert for some time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's almost as though without that piece, we're just going to be talking around and around and around the issues. We never drill down to it's childhood, but we're not doing it in a Freudian way, because we're doing the CPTSD model. We're doing like Pete Walker and I forgot the name of the lady who created the term CPTSD. She's a professor at Harvard. Please look up creator of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. This is embarrassing.
No, it's not. I know the exact person you're doing. I'm probably going through a brain, right now. But I will say this, though. What we're doing with Taranon now, with CPTSD, is finally getting people in touch with it.
Judith Herman. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, Judith Herman. Exactly.
See how
Judith
I gave
Herman.
him the same memory hole?
Yeah.
Actually,
and
Judith
Herman's work, but let's take Judith for a second, and how she led to Bessel van der Kolk's work, and how between Judith and Bessel, they are the keys of complex trauma.
Yeah.
Both of those two were phenomenal. So in Taranon right now, complex trauma is, we work with AA and NA. We ask you to continue your programs of recovery, but must say, codependency, like I've been in recovery for codependency a long time, was never back there. It was co-addiction back there. So all addictions, according to Gabor Mate, and I think he's correct, is a trauma response. We haven't looked at the fawn response. Even Judith Herman didn't talk about the fawn response. In terms of the fawn response, came into the later 90s with the Polyvagal Institute, with Bessel and Peter Levine. And
it's Pete Walker's term, isn't it? The fawn
It
response?
is Pete Walker's term. And give him credit. I remember calling him when I started our charity in Seattle. I think you've talked to him once or twice too. Yeah. He's an amazing person who pioneered the fawn response. We called it codependency, but no, it's the only non-biological response that comes out of childhood. When you're trying to be something to those parents and trying to calm them down and trying to shapeshift yourself, it doesn't work as an adult. And what we tend to do is look for shapeshifting later, and that same adult to actually put ourselves into that mold once again until, Richard, we reparent ourselves.
Shapeshifting is a good way of describing it. I like that.
It's a pretzel. And most of the people in our organization at Taranon will talk about that. Man, I never looked at this. And to my lovely treatment industry, we don't do enough of this when somebody's in treatment. We don't talk about complex trauma, and it's the biggest relapse issue out there. And so I really believe there's nothing more than narcissistic abuse that eradicates authenticity and triggers complex trauma. That's simply why we created the STAR Network. We think that the STAR Network, which be international, and we're going to absolutely try to get you as our international education ambassador, because all of us just love your work. We believe that this is so vital, that this is the worst public health disaster. You can look at the heads of all the countries you want, and the person who handed on that nuclear bomb will nail us long before COVID or the bubonic plague will be. and that's the attachment disorder. That's the person who will do anything to get to the top, and understand that they will stop at nothing to get there. And as you mentioned, even their children.
Yeah. You've actually made me rethink the Menendez case. I'm going to have to think about that again. From in terms of like, I know more now. Like the narcissistic family unit, the cult that they create. You know, the father putting his projections into the boys and them turning into a mini version of him or a manifestation of some side of him. I need to think about this.
You remember, don't forget too, much like, my dad, God rest his soul, but it was totally different ramifications. My father was a Holocaust survivor. So my sister and I obviously had to deal with the unspoken words of being a Holocaust surviving firstborn American generation. Well, with the Menendez family, he came from Cuba. He was exiled there. That was the Castro model. That was communism there. And so when he came to here and escaped, I can't even imagine the trauma of his. Let's look back at all these groups and have some grace and have some compassion because, they didn't know much better. We at our place are starting the parenting program simply because I don't think any child wants to be evil.
Right.
I don't believe a 5-year-old who's in an attachment, not getting the proper attachment, wants to be evil. And I think that's why we as a society have to deal with the recreation of trauma. Quit putting it in toxic masculinity or the feminism movement. Look at ourselves, just like you said. The key to it is balance, a balanced, healthy life. And so much we're just grasping for straws of places to hide. My guys and girls who are watching this right now are looking hopefully in the mirror and saying, I don't need a movement to hide the fact that I need to be the change that we need to see in this world for my children and for myself.
100%. 100%. It's interesting when you were talking there, I was thinking in Europe, there are certain places where I'm more popular than others for no real reason. But Romania is one, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia. Places where Albania, places where there was quite harsh communism or, strict militaristic, dictatorial, Titoist socialism. The former Yugoslavians will call me out. It's not really, I know it's not really communism.
As my co-founder, be careful.
As your
she'll
co-founder, she'll
tonight.
correct me. She'll be like, no more Chavapis for you. So in that environment, what I've noticed is there's a big focus on narcissism, and even people who were not alive for the war, they're still carrying the intergenerational trauma. They're splitting the view of reality in this very harsh, two-dimensional, black and white, non-nuanced way. It's almost like the empathy is bombed or terrorized out of people, and then they come back from war, or the siege ends, or the bombing ends, but they can't quite reintegrate back again. What do you end up with? Borderline, psychopathy, narcissism. Why? Because in those environments, I'm not going to say it's adaptive, but psychopathy could be adaptive. It helps people get by.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And culturally, if you look at the East, and we did Domestic Abuse Awareness Month last month, the STAR Network, and I'd love for everybody to go to starnetwork.org. You'll see we had 3 excellent subject matter experts that we were asking. It was a multicultural look. Okay, one was actually the wife of the Wolf of Wall Street, Dr. Nadine, who had Jordan, as we all watched that for Martin Scorsese. Was Scorsese, right? Was
Scorsese, yeah.
Amazing show, and Jordan was an amazing narcissist.
Did she like it when she watched it?
Actually, she's powerful beyond belief. She looks back at it, and like we say at Taranon, you really can't forget the past. You do have to live from the past. And she has seen how far she has come. And I have seen it too, because she became a psychologist as well. And
after that relationship.
I have to make sense out of it. I did ask her. I really asked her once. I was looking at her. I said, Nadine, did he really send the lawyer to get the Quaaludes when the boat was sinking? She says, that was him. He really did.
Real. Yeah.
He didn't care. So between that, we had an African-American subject matter expert who had the Battered Women's Army, and we had an amazing biracial woman who runs Authentic Insider. She's just powerful beyond belief. So we brought them all there together to talk about domestic abuse. That reminds me what you just said about the cultural issues and the clinical issues. You mentioned the East. You mentioned Mao, one-child policy. So when you didn't get a male in China, you literally wanted to put the child, the girl on the side of the road. If you imaged and you saw you were going to have a girl, you literally want to abort. Think about the attachment disorders that came out of China.
Wow.
Think about in India, where you see absolute heinous domestic abuse of women. I mean, 4,000 women last year died at the hands of their husband that were not even prosecuted. So look at the attachment issues that are happening in the East based upon cultural issues, because we're going to recreate this trauma until we intervene on it. And until we do that, we'll never have peace on this earth.
Very true. Very, very true. Was there any other topics you wanted to cover before we hand over to the questions?
No, except I am also triggered. So we did a great meeting last night. We had 100 and some people.
We should do some breathing exercises.
Go to Tar-Anon. what we do, here's how Tar-Anon works. So we will do a little psychoeducation. We would love, obviously, to have you at our meeting one day to do that. And then we turn the whole meeting over to a topic based upon the steps. But at the end, Richard, we do breath work.
Nice.
Because you've heard all this dysregulating stories. You've had to be triggered. You know, today we talk about the Menendez, right? We talk about Anthony Bourdain and the mystery of his passing, the Johnny Depp trial. We didn't even talk about P. Diddy and the attachment disorder, okay? The attachment disorder where you had no mom, no dad. Listen, I think his mom, just for instance, if we want to understand the attachment disorder really, really well and do it Hollywood style, look at P. Diddy for just a moment, because he lived in Miami. He lived in my area. And we all turned our eyes the other way because he was a phenomenal rap guy, billions of dollars, you know, that mystical thing. I still think that Tupac was somehow in his eyesight. But when you look at his childhood, okay, his mom tried his best, but she worked 3 jobs. His father was an absolute gangster. He sold dope and died when he was 4 years old. If you look at American Gangster with Denzel Washington, you'll see the whole story basically around Diddy's father. So he had nobody. And so he grew up with this kill or be killed, as most attachment disordered people do.
Are you saying the Denzel Washington movie American Gangster is like P. Daddy?
Yeah, it was actually about
I said P. Daddy. How Freudian was that?
Yeah, well, I used to call Puff Daddy, but now we call him P. Daddy. We don't even know, AKA whatever he is. But at the end of the day, yes, his father was a dope dealer, and when you saw American Gangster, it really is around his life. He wasn't.
It's based on his life.
No, it's not based on Denzel's, but that whole group, which is an African American group there that was part of this whole thing. His father was in it, and he got killed at 4 dealing dope. So here you have no primary caregiver and a father. The mom is working 3 different jobs, so you don't have that connection. You want in your mind to kind of glamorize the father, right? You want to be close even though he's passed. So you have no real role model. You don't have empathy and accountability. You're a child that wants to kill or be killed. You become father. We don't have to get into too many of our politicians, but if you look at some of our politicians, they became their daddy.
You want a mirage of the father, a puffy cloud of the daddy. So puffy, puff. Listen, that's free. You can keep that one, Diddy. $1 million, please.
So, but the attachment disorder, and we're looking at this as if it's, everybody's talking about it, right? We have thousands, who knows who's going to get caught up in this web of hell?
Yeah.
But I always think the enablers, the people who get caught up, are the ones that are more culpable. The person with the disorder, I always say that they're in my second room on my 3rd floor of my psych unit.
Right.
What about the people who are watching? What about the complicity of silence? Where are the values in those people? Are they jumping into this toxic masculinity and toxic femininity world? Or are they looking in the mirror and saying, what values am I giving up to be in this group?
Yeah, I'm not having it when everybody's clutching their pearls and going, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. I'm like, thousands of you must have known. Thousands of you must have profited from silence, or you were being paid and you were helping. Maybe in small ways, but come on, give me a break.
Absolutely.
So, that can't have been going on so blatantly, such big parties for so long, without a good number of people, many of them celebrities, many of them with platforms who could have stopped him, knowing precisely what was happening. Come on.
How many mothers and fathers sacrificed their children? Have we actually heard the lyrics of Justin Bieber's songs? Have we, anybody that was put in Diddy's company who was a mogul in music, what mom or dad would actually give up their child to get to that place of fame? Think about this. I mean, and this is where the values are so critical. I'm just going back to your 10 years or 12 years, I've watched you on YouTube, realizing with my clients that these values are the most wonderful things to hold on to, these boundaries. Why would we give our child up to the world of Diddy?
Yeah.
Why would we be silent when we know that father is abusing or beating his kid?
Yeah.
What is actually doing that to us? Well, I hate to say that this is childhood trauma. It felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Until we really get our hands around this, we're going to keep recreating this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now you're welcome to any Hollywood story, any football story, any athletic story. It's all yours.
I couldn't possibly. I would get sued. I think we have about 19 minutes left. We're until 7. Is that right? Should we give the good people a chance to ask some questions of Dr. Jamie and myself? If you have any questions, folks, please make them one sentence long. Write them in English. Make them intelligible, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Yeah, it seems to go hand in hand a little bit. I think a lot of highly narcissistic, psychopathic people, they gravitate to celebrity because of the power it gives them, not for it in its own end, but for the power it gives them to exploit people.
Absolutely. And everybody's eating from the trough, right? If you don't have the values, it does. You know, one of the things I haven't brought up is your programming, and I want to bring it up before we end today. I remember many years ago, actually first looking at your programming and how powerful it is. I believe you started teaching martial arts to people on YouTube.
That's right.
And I believe the stories and the algorithms and the people who came to you when you started sharing your story of being a star, a survivor of toxic abusive relationships, you started seeing that you were actually touching a lot of other people in a different sort of way.
Yeah.
I'm hoping against hope, and Mila and I have spoken a lot, and we have a large team that's international, is to bring your men's programming, bring all your program. I think it applies to all of our populations. We deal with men, women, caregivers, teens, tweens, LGBTQ, but your programming is excellent. So it's a little bit of a teaser that we're hoping against hope within the next couple of days for people to go to the Star Network and be able to access your programming. Mm-hmm. I believe it's so relatable. You know, one of the reasons I'm here, and over the last 4 years, we've met so many subject matter experts, and I'm deeply grateful for their awareness that they're bringing. In psychology, we say it's awareness, transformation, and self-love. So if you're bringing awareness, please keep bringing it. But you touch and you put people in the transformative place. You do create awareness. You're aware of the cognitive dissonance. Then you create programming that I think is very relatable to the masses. It's not deep clinical, things that we would do in the psych unit. It is so, I loved it. I went through it, and then I told Mila we have to bring it to the Star Network. So I'm hoping against hope if they want to get your program. Of course, they get it at your place, or they can come to ours. If you come to ours, you give some money to charity. We are a charity, but if not, go to yours.
It's very kind of you. I do try to make some of the models are complicated. You know, it's difficult. I do try to make it as practical as I possibly can. I think Break Narcissistic Possession is going to be on your site soon. What's your main website that people can go to?
Starnetwork.org. Again, you're no longer a victim, especially if you're listening to Richard on his channel, and if you're here tonight, you're no longer a victim. When you come to Taranon, you're now a survivor, and STAR is survivors of toxic abusive relationships. So we're the starnetwork.org, and we're kind of the Library of Congress, the 501c3. Mm-hmm. And we're very grateful, for you years ago, kind of inspiring, not just me, but for all of us. And we're hoping that you go around the world sending all of the people who connect to you to Taranon. It's a free program, and it works so well with a therapist, and it works so well with a coach, and it works so well with AA and NA and CA. It just allows us to embrace the shadow of our complex trauma.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Are there any good questions that have popped up, Dylan?
Yes. Hello, everyone. We've got a question pinned from Nell here. So we've got, what can women do to help men feel more heard and safe?
Should I go with that?
You can take the first shot. I've got some ideas too. Go for it.
I think one of the things that I will be reiterating more is it makes me very sad, all of this stuff. I want to see people unified, and I want to see people back in communities, trusting each other again, helping each other. It's like the issue with racism, where people get stuck on an idea. The proper dividing line in humanity is not between race or political party or between gender. It's really between narcissistic psychopaths and everybody else. There are some very, very determinedly nasty people out there. This is true. And there's enough of them, because if we say, oh, narcissistic psychopathy, maybe 3 to 5% of the population, but America's 333 million now people. That's a lot. And if they can, through network effects, damage 200 people each, which they can pretty easily, you'll end up with this miasma. You've got the signal is now being drowned out by noise, by the confusion, by the chaos, by the division. And I'd like to see people come together again. We were discussing this before when I took Jamie to the docks. Men don't know that there are women out there that can absolutely help them. And especially when you look on social media, where everything is very, very divisive, the minority are extremely vocal, they're very aggressive, they want to troll everybody. You lose the signal because of the noise. And men, it would be nice to see men being helped by women overcome negative relationships with women. Why? Well, because women know about female narcissism. They have mothers, they have a mother-in-law, they have a boss at work. They know what it's like. It doesn't need to come down in this gendered way. It could be like compassion. You could say, yeah, absolutely. I know what you've experienced. You can talk to me about it. I've experienced it too. The problem is, just back to the racism thing, just very, very briefly, is it's a human software fault. If I'm a narcissistic psychopath and I'm abusive, I'm going to be abusive in a middle-class, middle-aged, white, northwest of England way. And you might end up thinking, oh, these scousers, these private school boys, these middle-aged men suck, white men suck, scousers suck. But it's not that. I'm just being an asshole through the filter of whatever I'm here with. If you go to Hong Kong and a Cantonese speaking person is going to be rude to you, they're going to be rude to you in a Cantonese speaking Hong Kong way. That doesn't, it's like a software fault. It's a philosophical, you don't reflexively then think, well, then Cantonese speaking people from Hong Kong are all that way. I understand why the software fault is happening, but we don't have enough time to keep in this space. We have to transcend this. We have to move past this. There are humans out there. Most people are good. Trust me, I travel all the time. Most people are good. But if you're getting your information about reality from social media and mainstream media, which, as we've said, are highly corrupted, highly infected, narcissistic, psychopathic media, then you would get a skewed view of reality, and you think people are shitty and horrible, and they're really not.
I also believe that if you're not taking care of yourself, Richard, you can't be of any help to that man that you're asking about. The beauty of a star is that stars don't look at us, right? Stars are out there. We look at them. And when I talk to a woman or I talk to a man, if you're reparenting yourself, being fair, being consistent, being available, if you're doing the stress reduction, the emotional regulation, if you're hanging around healthy people, you're a corrective experience, not just for that man that you just mentioned that you want to help. You're a corrective experience for the children who want to feel neurosafe with you as well. So I don't think you can actually be that impact on anybody until you're that impact on yourself. So the beauty is, if I would answer you, is to be able to bear witness to somebody's pain, you have to almost bear witness to your own pain. To forgive and have compassion for somebody else, you first have to have radical acceptance and forgiveness and compassion for yourself. So do the work. Do the work, and that's how you're going to help that person. And if that person is, like Richard said, one of those 8 people that just can't get to the empathic side or can't get to the loving side and just has to transact, then goodbye. You've done your best. Yeah. You've been invested into the effort and not the outcome. Yeah. So it's a no-lose deal.
100%.
Wonderful, gentlemen. We have a question from Concan on YouTube. Do you think that ADHD exists without trauma?
Well, yes. It doesn't necessarily mean you're raised in a childhood trauma environment, but then I'm a weirdo. This is where I'm going to turn into a mystical hippie on you. I think the devices and the social media and the culture is traumatic. So do you need a mother and father who are neglecting you or abusing you in a classic way? No. This culture that we've created is traumatic. And that trauma is probably producing a lot of the ADHD response. Because if we look at the injury and then figure out what would cause that injury, does it look like a knife wound? Does it look like a bullet wound? Does it look like shrapnel? What's the injury here? I can't concentrate, or I can only feel calm concentrating on 5 different things at the same time. What would cause that? What would cause that adrenophilia? I need to feel hyperactivated, hyperstimulated all the time. I'm sorry, I sound like a hippie. I'm also going to sound like a boomer. It's them damn devices. Those goddamn devices you kids are always playing with.
And I think those damn devices fit into that self-fulfilling prophecy that what feels comfortable to us as a child. I agree with you. I think we can get to these damn devices and it's like the trigger that makes us much worse. Being a person who have been diagnosed or accused of being ADD or ADHD, I fall a little bit more on the Gabor Mate side. And I think that drugs and alcohol are solutions for trauma. They make sense in childhood trauma. Let's talk about CPTSD as childhood trauma. And for me, coming from a dysregulated, fairly much roller coaster childhood, why wouldn't I be distracted? Why wouldn't my neurology look for any way in the whole wide world but to escape?
Yeah.
And then some doctor who didn't understand complex trauma, nobody did, would diagnose and give me, Ritalin or Adderall at that moment.
Yep.
So I believe that ADD and ADHD can be a trauma response. And I also believe that when we retrain our brain and develop resilience, that's what complex PTSD recovery is developing resilience. I do this in the work site. I think we don't need that medication. I think we create compensatory behavior by neuroplasticity. I think we can retrain our brain and be less distracted and less diagnosed with ADD. That's just me. But I think those devices just also fit us like a glove.
Yeah, it's maybe it's not cause, it's like an accelerant, a catalyst for it. That's an interesting thing. I'd forgotten that about ADHD. It is disassociative. So anything that allows us to get out of the here and now, because for some of us being present in the body is still quite uncomfortable. It doesn't feel very good. And so you want to escape. So it's a kind of CPTSD model flight response. Not here, not this, not now, anything at all but this.
You're in recovery from complex trauma when you allow your body to make the answer, not your mind. You and I were talking earlier. The mind can deflect, distract, it could, deny. It literally goes back to what felt comfortable with these unresolved issues. But the body, like Bessel says, keeps the score. Yeah. So if you're feeling dysregulated, I'd say listen to your body, listen to your intuition. Don't listen to your mind. And I find in recovery, at least in my own personal recovery, and if you read the promises at Tarnon, the more my body makes the call, the better my decision is actually I'm making. 100%. Go figure. I never had to do that, but in the last 10 years, I've noticed it.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect, gentlemen. We have time for one more question.
Let us have one more.
Yes. This is from Joe. Do you think the conflict between the sexes is the reason for plummeting birth rates?
Yes. It's not the sole reason. There's an ending question that's very politically controversial one. I'll just put it out there. I think that men don't know how to be men anymore. Women don't know how to be women anymore. We have all this supposed liberty and freedom and choice, but we don't have permission to be. Nobody has the permission to be. I'll stop on that.
Well, listen, I totally agree with you on this. I think we see ourselves always now as human doings and never as human beings. And if you look at the values, this is a good way to wrap it up, because we talked about toxic masculinity and toxic feminist, feminist movement. Let's just say that if what I've seen, and this is my own clients and my own self, is our values are not much different. I mean, if you talk to a woman or you talk to a man and they say, I'd like permission to cry. I'd like permission to reach out and get some help. I'd like permission to give myself forgiveness. I like, and to me, it's not a male or a female sort of trait. It literally is a healing trait. It's being vulnerable. It's being a human being. When my beautiful daughter looks at me and she sometimes smacks her head, "Oh, daddy, I'm so stupid." I said, no, words matter, sweetheart. Just say I'm so human. Just say I'm so human. And I think this is the beauty of men and women. In so many ways, we're so much alike. And yet, rather than look at ourselves of how we're alike, we run off and create sides. And I think today's discussion around childhood trauma, whether you're a man or a woman, is pretty darn universal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think so. There was a thing I went to in Romania, and it showed you how Romanians used to live. There was all different peoples of Romania. There's not just one people. And they said in one of their places, in the Orthodox Church, if a man and a woman were getting close to divorce, the priest would say, okay, we're going to put you through this process where they'd stick them in a dark hut for 20 days and they couldn't leave. Food would be put through. They could only talk to each other and they would have to feed each other. Sounds weird, but it actually had a very, very successful rate. And I think for men and women, all of this would be fixed in a zombie apocalypse. I don't want an apocalypse. I'm not crazy. But if there was no phones, if there was no social media, and we just got back to human communities, there's no problem. All of your instincts are the correct ones. All of the things that you want to do, it's how we've evolved for millennia. It's fine. We just need to get out of the way. Our culture's getting in the way.
Oh, it's so true. I'll end with this too, because I'm very fortunate to be the TAR mentor initially as we train other TAR mentors for TARnon. And we see, like I said, 400 or 500 people a week. We do TAR 101, and that's for men and women. And we do the family, that's men and women, and literally parental, men and women. So today, because of our Men's Health Month and why we're doing this, we're starting our men's group in 2 weeks, and we're going to start our women's group in 3 weeks for TARnon. I think, and that's fine. And I think we need to culturally be able to say the things we need to say. And if we're feeling like we're new in recovery, we want to feel safe and we want to talk about masculine things, great, feminine things, great. I think coming together in TAR 101 meetings is my personal belief. I find such joy in both sharing their vulnerabilities together. Last night we had 120 people, 50-50, I would say. And somehow or another, we all found out we were very much alike. Now, we may need a men's group. We may need a female's group to feel neurosafe for a while, and we're going to create that. But Richard, I think the human condition is that we need to reparent ourselves. God love our parents. God love me. God love anybody who's a parent. But we're never all going to get it right. And I think that when we find out we're much more alike than different, we'll stop this nonsense on toxic masculinity and toxic, feminist movement, and we'll just come together as human beings and not human doings.
Wonderful. I love it. Peace and love across the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you very much to Jamie Huysman for coming in. I really appreciate it, mate.
This has been a joy. I told you, besides for being on my bucket list, just doing this podcast with you is on my bucket list too. And doing it in the home of the Beatles, you all. Do you know what that means? I mean, to me, it's rock DNA. And so you're rock DNA too. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. Ladies and gents, thank you so much for your time and for your attention. We look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you.